got 3 here. Okay, so bear with me. I know I'm several years late for part 3 of the review of Death Note, but in my defense, okay, there is no defense, but since Death Note's live-action movie has come out on Netflix and has been Americanized all to hell, I feel this is the perfect opportunity for me to get back onto the Death Note train myself, considering the fact that in reality, even though I don't say this much, Death Note is my second favorite anime, only being beaten by Dragon Ball Z. I really love Death Note's psychological and moralistic type of battles, as well as intellectual battles and detective cases. I love how Death Note basically rides on the moralities of whether or not killing is justifiable, if it's for the means to save other people or for the means to view themselves as a godlike deity figure in order to stop evil from happening when that themselves makes them evil, and thus we get this weird silver lining of what's right and what's wrong. So because of this, I decided to go ahead and review the Death Note series as a whole, but split it into 3 different parts, because the atmosphere pretty much changes from when Light first discovers the notebook, the moment he loses the possession of the notebook and works with L in the detective agency, and then the moment that L dies and basically everything comes to a close. This is part 3. If you're ever curious and you just watch this video out of curiosity, I will send the annotations to part 1 and 2 right here. You can click on either of those, or preferably click 1 and then watch 1 and then 2 afterwards in order to view, my review of the series, although the quality has gotten much better since then. And you can basically see not only my summary of those 2, but my thoughts on those 2, and then on this part I will not only do my thoughts on this part, but I'll be doing my thoughts on Death Note basically as a whole, just summarizing my entire feelings. However, I do need to let you know this, there is a spoiler warning obviously, so if you haven't watched Death Note, go ahead and check it out, or if you just want to get interested into it while knowing what's going to happen beforehand, then enjoy the rest of the video. So without further ado, let's get into that summary. 4 years have passed since L's died, and as a result, Light is basically king of the world. Kira's name is known worldwide and is feared through criminals and is honored through several people, to a point where they've even developed Kira-like cults and public unions for Kira that support group. This, however, does end up coming to the issue of who's going to stop Kira. Light Yagami ends up becoming the new L, so he leads the task force in the Kira investigation. However, since L's gone, they're not really getting that much progress because Light is actually Kira, so obviously they can't get anywhere with him. And he continues to kill criminals while that's all happening. However, all hope for humanity isn't lost, because the detective agency comes in the form of 2 new characters who are basically successors to L. Meet Mello and Nier. 2 characters that have basically studied all of L's traits to the point where they downright copy them. Mello has the ability to basically copy L's sweet tooth, and Nier basically copies L's ability to just, play around with figurines and toys, and, it just basically fiddles with stuff to get the brain working. So it's almost like these 2 are basically 2 halves of one whole L. Anyway, the way they decide to go at this case is in 2 completely different ways, and thus causes the task force a bit of problems. Mello decides to go off and do several huge criminal-like activity plans because he is the leader of a mafia, and thus his plans to expose Kira for who he is become so drastic to the point where they involve not only kidnapping Light's younger sister and getting Soichiro Yagami killed, but also ends up kidnapping Takura, who has become one of the spokesmen for Kira on Sakura TV, which is pretty funny considering that she's basically Light's ex-girlfriend, but still does stuff for Light. I thought that was pretty interesting. Also, on Light's end, Light has developed another new follower in the form of Teru Mikami, one of the biggest worshippers of Kira and has one of the highest intelligence and basically views things as Kira would view them. He's basically like a Kira 2.0, if you will, and he basically believes in deleting criminals off the face of the earth. During his daily routine, he was given the notebook after Misa pretty much lost ownership of it due to Light suggesting that she do so she can live a normal life. Teru Mikami ends up having possession of the notebook and killing off basically all the criminals. Like, he basically does the Light's job, faster than Light could do it. So, criminals are getting killed left and right, and while this is all happening, Takada ends up getting kidnapped by Mello because of one of Mello's schemes, and Light feels that Takada is a liability at this point, and there's nothing left to do but have Takada kill Mello, while simultaneously Light kills Takada, and thus the two wind up dead. However, this causes a problem because Teru Mikami sees that Takada was also a liability to Light, so he ends up having Takada killed as well. He ends up writing in the notebook to have Takada killed. Unfortunately, Light ends up killing Takada, so there's two sentences of Takada being killed, but one of them obviously didn't happen because Light was faster at killing Takada than Mikami was, and this starts Nier to basically be suspicious of things that happened, and because of this, Takada's death ends up leading Nier into the suspicions of Teru Mikami. So Nier and his task force, which Nier is also one of the head detectives of the U.S. government, ends up following Mikami and following his daily procedures day after day after day until they completely recognize his entire exercise, eating, and killing patterns. And they were able to find the Death Note successfully, switch it out with a fake Death Note, copy all of Teru Mikami's names that he wrote on that notebook with similar handwriting, and was able to do all of that in the course of one night. Okay. Well, because of this, Nier's basically devised a plan in order to expose Light of being Kida, because he basically could pick up the fact that Light, who serves as L, was Kida the whole time, but had no way to really bring this into fruition. So he develops a plan to bring everyone into the warehouse and then wait for Mikami to go in and kill them all at once. By writing all the names into the Death Note, the person whose name isn't written in the Death Note will be the one that's exposed of being Kida. This, however, doesn't go the way Light and Mikami planned, simply because the notebook is swapped out with a fake notebook, and thus, once Nier ends up having the real notebook, it's revealed at this point that Light's plan is going to fail. Light's the only name who isn't written in the notebook, and thus exposes Light of being Kida in front of the task force, Nier's task force, and basically everybody in that warehouse. After this, Light gives one of the most powerful speeches in anime history, and I feel was one of the most shocking scenes in anime history, to be perfectly honest, that pretty much tightropes over the line of morality of what's right and what's wrong, and why Light did what he did so many years ago. Nier basically exposes him by stating that he's nothing more than just a serial killer who believes that he has a god complex. Mikami, shocked at the fact that his god is losing this battle, basically kills himself to cause a giant spectacle. He stabs himself in the neck with a pin, it causes blood to splurt everywhere, and Light ends up trying to take advantage of all the chaos by writing names down in his hidden notebook piece that he keeps in his watch. Matsuda shoots him up. Light ends up taking huge battle wounds. Mikami's blood splatter causes the big enough scene for Light to escape. Light ends up escaping, however he's got way too many wounds to escape. He's losing blood fast, and the task force are basically going to find him because he didn't make it that far. So Ryuk takes it upon himself in order to write Light's name down into the Death Note, and Light dies in the middle of the stairway instead of on the top, which is representative of heaven, or on the bottom, which is representative of hell, because the users of notebooks of the Death Note who end up dying basically go to Mu, a world of nothingness. Light dies and the series ends. Unless you've read the manga, which has a slightly different ending, but the result is basically that Light ends up dying, the Kira stuff is over, and that's basically the end of Death Note. Now, how do I feel of part 3 as a whole of Death Note? Well, honestly, I gotta say this is the weakest part. It feels to me like the writer of Death Note, while he is very brilliant, and I love this series to death, pun not intended, it feels to me that the writer of Death Note tried his hardest to make it so that Light would lose, and it felt like since they took out L, the only other opposing rival to Light, There was no other way that they could oppose light. So instead, the solution was to develop L 2.0 and L 2.02. Mellow and Near. Mellow and Near basically feel like broken halves of L. And it felt like it was kind of weird that they had to do this. There's no explanation of these characters, where they came from or how they came to be, unless you read the manga. And they just sort of show up out of pure nowhere. I mean, they just pop up. And even in the manga, they're not explained directly in the story. They're just sort of covered in backstory that you see if you read the secret files. But it feels like, oh, Mello did these big, huge, chaotic plans just so that Nier can piggyback on top of those plans that Mello was making, watch them fail so that he can gain information, so that he can deduce that Light was Kira. I don't know, it seemed to me that it was just so off that the only way that they were going to succeed in beating Light was for Nier and Mello to use information that was already obtained to them by L during the Kira files and use those to an advantage in order to beat Light. Like, it feels like none of these three characters alone have the ability to beat Light, but together they were all able to do it, which makes sense, I get it. But to me, it just felt a whole lot of desperate writing to me. Mello and Nier feel too much like carbon copies of L. Like, they're just not really good enough to be L, so they had to be broken halves of L, and thus being the ending result of catching Light. Another thing that pretty much turns me off about this part, and while I do like Death Note as a whole, this part was basically full of a lot of weird moves to me, just strange moves. Going off what I said before with Nier and Mello, Nier is the biggest offender of what I was saying about the whole copying L thing. I mean, look at him, he's basically L. He's a shorter version of L with white hair. Like, there's literally no difference, which is no surprise why he's the one that ends up living after the case is over, and Mello's the one that ends up dying. To me, it seemed way too much like Nier was basically L. Like, he was L. He was the copy of L. And one of the things that bothers me and rubs me the wrong way, even to this day, is Nier's plan. Nier's plan could have failed in several ways. One of those ways being the fact that he was way too reluctant on Mikami. What if Mikami didn't decide to kill everybody that day? What if he took the day off? What if he decided to just kill criminals in the safety of his own home instead of killing them in the warehouse? Then what would have been the point? I mean, yeah, I know that Mikami was working under Light's orders, but one of the things I felt was so off about this was the fact that Nier conveniently knew all of Mikami's procedure because they studied him so much, but Mikami himself wasn't smart enough to pick up on any of this. Also, I refuse to believe that Nier had a plan where one of his task force members basically took the notebook, was able to take several pictures of it without Mikami going back and saying, oh, did someone take the notebook? I mean, it's the Death Note, one of the biggest weapons in serial killing history. You would think that Mikami would keep a little bit more track of it rather than just throwing it in his locker while he lifts weights. It felt a little too scripted to me, if that makes any sense. Way too many times was this notebook left wide open just for them to do that. This is a deadly weapon. Keep that shit on hand. I mean, hell, Light Yagami in the first half of the series put the notebook in a drawer that if you opened it wrong, it would burst into flames. You mean to tell me Mikami wasn't smart enough to pick up on something like that? It just was too convenient to me. And to have one of his task force members basically copy the handwriting down word for word with every criminal's name that was written down on it, make a completely ultimate replica of the notebook, and then have all of that done in a series of one night? Looking kinda sketchy to me. I'm sorry, that just is a lot to take in. And it felt like just Deus Ex Machina so that Light can get caught in the act. Another problem I have with this is the fact that Light himself was a little too dependent on other characters. Back when the series started, Light basically pulled off a lot of his evil schemes himself, and relying on other people caused problems. He relied on Misa, which is why he ended up getting suspected as Kira, because Misa basically was found out as being the second Kira pretty much the instant that L was able to kidnap Misa's phone. Yeah, that's a problem. So the minute that ended up happening, he ended up having to make a plan all on his own, which was the ending result of Rem and L dying. It seems to me that when Light creates a plan on his own, he's actually a lot better off. When he starts relying on people like Takeda and Mikami and Misa, things start to fall apart for him because those characters end up acting in a way that Light just simply wouldn't. I find it weird how Mikami ended up killing Takeda, even though Light specifically told him not to act in any order that he didn't say. So the fact that Mikami ended up killing Takeda, yeah, he did it because it's something Light would do, but at the same time, that was being taken care of by Light. It just felt to me that Mikami wasn't good at following orders, and that's where Light ended up falling apart. It felt like other characters were the reason that he lost. Takeda was basically the reason that Nier was able to find out that Light was Kira in the first place because of Mello's whole plan. Everything to me just felt like it was too reluctant on other characters, and that just doesn't feel right to me, considering that Light doesn't need to rely on other characters in order to get ahead. I mean, yeah, he can use them as chess pieces in order to get further, but this basically downright made him dependent on those characters, and that's why he ended up dying. Again, there's another flaw. What if Mikami had just killed Nier's task force members and chose not to kill Light? I mean, then it would prove that Kira's still out there somewhere and he's killing other criminals. Yes, it would have caused suspicion between Light and the task force members, but to the very least, the one opposing factor, Nier, would have been killed. And then again, it was a fake notebook, so it still would have caused suspicion around each of the characters on who is Kira and who isn't. It just would have narrowed it down to the members that were in the task force and not just the members that were on Nier's task force. But regardless. So yeah, there were just way too many things that felt like ass pulls just so that they could end the series off. Does this mean that this half of the anime is really awful? No, it felt to me like there was a lot of moves that were made just for the sake of the moment, just so that Light could get stopped. Light killing L basically made him unstoppable, and they had to pull a lot of strings to make sure that he was taken down. And does that make me seem like I'm rooting for Light? Well, yes and no. Don't get me wrong, I do love Light. He's one of my favorite anime characters in anime history. But at the same time, when it comes to a battle between morals, Light and L both do have their problems. They're not perfect either. Their views on justice are very much different, and I think that's what makes Death Note so appealing. Each of these characters felt like they were doing something for the better good. I mean, yeah, L, Nier, and Mello all were on the same side of killing Kira, simply because Kira is a serial killer. Light basically becomes chaotic and evil, but for the sake of good, which pretty much contradicts himself. But at the same time, killing Light was a problem as well. Yeah, it brought justice in the sense that they were able to bring down one of the biggest serial killers in history. But at the same time, Light does a very powerful speech towards the end of the series that brings up some good points. And while Light's methods of stopping criminals is rather different than what most people would do, it got results. I mean, Light stated that criminal activity has been reduced by like 70%, which is a large number considering the fact that crime reigns throughout the entire world of society. So for Light to actually get results like that and a worship and a following, it does show that he was making an impact on the world. So with all of that being said, does that make Light right or does that make L right? We don't know. No one knows. Well, no one can really pick an answer. It's just like saying 2 plus 3 is 5, but 1 plus 4 is 5. 2 ways to solve a problem, and they both end up with the same solution. So the thing about it is the moral high ground that Death Note ends up having is one of the things that intrigues me the most about this series. And honestly, I really like the fact that this anime covers things like that. It brings up questions. What was right? What was wrong? Who was the protagonist? Who was the antagonist in the series? When people say our protagonist Light or our protagonist L or something, I get a weird mix-up in my head. Because a lot of people, and this is most seen recently when people are reviewing the Death Note live-action movie that's on Netflix, view Light as the protagonist simply because the series starts off with him. But that's just simply not the case. Because there is no protagonist or antagonist in Death Note, to be perfectly honest. And it's one of the reasons that makes it so appealing. Yeah, Light we're on the side of Light because the story veers it towards him, a character that we can pretty much relate to, which is a high schooler, a basic high schooler student. But in all out honesty, the only reason it's doing it is so we, the audience, can pretty much see how he's doing these crimes and what he's doing to get away with them. Because then we wouldn't be left in the dark about what's happening. If we had watched the entire series from like L, Nier, or Mello's perspective, then we wouldn't know a lot of things. How are criminals just suddenly dying like this, and what's the ending result? At least with Light side, we get to see the Shinigamis, we get to see Ryuk, Rem, Misa, the second kid, all of that unfold on its end, and see what Light's going to do in order to get out of it. Almost like the mind of a criminal. Which brings us to nice two-sided perspective. We don't know who the protagonist or the antagonist is. It's ambiguous, but that's what makes the series the most appealing, and it's why I like Death Note so much. So to see this part of the series sort of just downplay a lot of things just to end it, and I gotta be honest, if you were to end the series in any way though, I feel this is the only real way to do it. I mean, yeah, there's other ways to end this series, but I feel like this series in itself didn't really have many ways to end it other than someone or something outsmarting Light, and this had to have been it. It just, to me, Death Note is so ambiguous to the point where you question yourself, your own morality, and what is right or wrong, but at the same time, that's what makes it so good. So, to conclude all of this, basically, this part of the anime, part 3, is good, but at the same time, it still has various problems. To me, to be quite honest, I think the series should have ended in a way to where both Light and L died. I feel that's the only way to really end this, and I am aware that there is a way where that happens, but at the same time, since they wanted to go ahead and continue the series with Light reigning supreme for a while, I guess the only other way would have been to bring in more detectives in order to stop Light. Granted, I wish it wasn't so obvious that they were L clones and had a bit more of their own character and personality in them rather than just bits and pieces of L's personality. It just brings them as offsetting. To me, I don't really like Mello and Nier. I mean, yeah, they're okay characters anime-wise, but to me, these characters came off as, oh, we don't have anything else to do, so we're just going to go ahead and make L clones, because that's the only thing we can think of that'll be just as good as L in terms of solving this case. I'm sorry, there's other good detectives out there, and yes, L is considered one of the best anime detectives in anime history, one of the smartest characters, but the solution isn't to make duplicates of him. At least that's how I felt it was. But overall, if you haven't watched Death Note, please give it a watch. This series is great. It will take some time and patience if you're one of those who prefers more of the fighting or action-packed or like things constantly happening. So you're going to need patience if you want to watch Death Note. But it's a 37-episode series with really 25 episodes being, canon and not just padding. So with that said, I'll see you all then, everybody. Tyrone the God 3, out.